Hello to all that are viewing this. We are going to learn how to start factoring today. So the past couple units have been on how to do operations with polynomials, and today we are going to start working specifically with trinomials and special binomials. That is for the future. Today we're going to start with the basics of factoring and a little trick of how to learn how to factor. This will be used later. We will also use Desmos, so make sure you understand both methods in order to work with it later. Now, the X puzzle. What the X puzzle is also called are diamond puzzles or sum and product. The reason they are called sum and product puzzles, I'll write that up here, sum and product puzzles, is you are looking for the sum of one of them and the product of the other number. You will look for the product of the top number, so what two numbers multiply to the top, and the sum of the bottom. What you'll do is you will list out factors or numbers, pairs of numbers that multiply to the top, and see which pair adds or subtracts to the bottom number. So for example, number 1, I have 18 on top and 11 on bottom. What I will do is I'll write out pairs of numbers. So I have 1 and 18. Okay, 1 and 18, when I multiply those, I get 18, as we are using pairs that multiply. So I mainly have to check the addition. 1 plus 18 is equal to 19, so that's not it. Now I check for 2 and 9. I have 2 plus 9, and that gives me 11, and I know 2 and 9 multiply to 18. So those are my numbers that go to the side. And that is my answer. Those two numbers are your answer. It gets a little bit more complex when negatives are involved. So, number 2. I look up top and it is positive 60, and I need to multiply to that. On the bottom, it's negative 17, and it needs to add to that. What I need to remember is that the only things that multiply to a positive number are two positives or two negatives. So I'm going to look for two negative numbers that multiply to 60 and add to 17. So I start listing them down. I'm going to write pairs of that multiply, so I don't need to check that. So I have 1 and 60. Well, that adds to 61. 2 and 30. That gives me 32. I'm getting closer. 3 and 20. That gives me 23. 4 and 15. That gives me 19. Notice I'm getting closer and closer. You can do this check by dividing, so I can divide 60. I can divide 60 by 1, and that gives me 60. 60 divided by 2 gives me 30. Divided by 3 gives me 20. That's where I'm coming up with these pairs of numbers. You can fill out a times table, so one of those big grids, and that can help you. Or you can simply do this method. So divided by 4 equals 15. Now I'm going to divide by 5, and that equals 12. So these two numbers multiply to 60, add them together, I get 17. So I'm going to put 5 and 12. Now it does not matter which order you put, so I could have put 12 here and 5 here. Now if I check, 12 times 5 gives me 60. 12 plus 5 gives me positive 17. So what I need to do is I put negatives on both of them. So negative 5 times negative 12, that gives me positive 60 because two negatives multiply to a positive, and negative 12 and negative 5 add to negative 17. So that gives me negative 17, and those two numbers are my answers. So, you will be using this method, and there are a couple more examples that I will go through because these are 4 scenarios you will see, and there's a cheat sheet attached to the bottom of this in order to help you ease into learning this method. Number 3. Negative 30 on top is our multiply, and positive 7 is on the bottom what it needs to add to. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more complex, but it's not nearly as complex as you may think. The only things that multiply to a negative are one positive and one negative. So in this instance, I'm not really adding to 7, I'm subtracting to 7. I need to find two numbers that multiply to 30 and subtract to positive 7. So I'll start writing them out. 1 and 30. Well, if I subtract them, and I'm just going to divide and then subtract, I get negative 29. Divided by 2, I get 15. Well, when I subtract those, I get negative 13. And you may think, these getting negatives, maybe we should switch the order. But we'll see how this method how I can kind of change that around when I actually find my number. Divided by 3, I get 10. That gives me negative, so I'm basically putting a minus sign right here above all of these. That gives me negative 7. So I found my number. I have 7 here, I have 7 here. I know that those are my pair. That is my pair of numbers. So I'm going to put 3 and 10. However, when I subtract, I've got negative 7 because the bigger number was negative. If I subtract and the bigger number is negative, my answer is going to be negative. If I subtract and my smaller number is a negative, I'm going to get a positive result, meaning I put the negative on 3, and I can always double check. Negative 3 times 10, well, that gives me negative 30. Negative 3 plus 10, or in other words, 10 minus 3, both give me positive 7, and that is my pair. Finally, our last situation we can see is they're both negative. Now this one relates to 3, but instead, notice when I subtracted by a bigger number, I got a negative result. That's the only difference between 3 and 4. So I'm going to start dividing. So 1, and then I get 36. Divided by 1, I get 36. If you get a decimal, simply skip over it. So 1, I get 36. When I subtract, I get negative 35. 2, I get 18. I subtract, I get negative 16. Well, that number is getting smaller, and 9 is my target. Remember, I'm multiplying to the top, adding to the bottom, or in this case, subtracting. So I divide by 3. 3, and I get 12. Subtracting, I get negative 9. Well, there's my bingo. I have found my pair. And if you notice, well, my result was negative 9, so I can simply plug these two numbers into my side, and I will get my results. 3 and negative 12. We can always double check, so 3 times negative 12 gives me negative 36. And then 3 plus negative 12. So, 3 plus negative 12, or negative 12 plus 3, or even 3 minus 12. However you want to write it, all of these end up giving me negative 9, and that is the answer I was looking for on the bottom. Now, let's go over some simple tips, simple tricks to kind of, oh wait, if I try to remember all these rules, I need to write out all the pairs, which one needs to be negative. So, let's go over a few things. If you noticed, 1 and 2, then I'll write this in color, and red. So if you notice, numbers 1 and 2, the top number was positive, and that on the bottom I was adding. Top number, positive, I was adding. Now in this case I was adding even though they were both negatives. Because they were both the same sign, I'm still adding. On examples 3 and 4, the top number was negative, and then on the bottom I was subtracting. So you can use that top number and figure out, hey, it's positive, so I need to find two numbers that add to my bottom, or it's negative, and I can need to find two numbers that subtract. That is one little tip. As you progress with your division skills, if they're top-notch, or if you need a little work with them, you will want to practice them, as this unit will kind of span over a couple days, and it is very, very crucial in every math that's beyond Algebra 1. So, practice your division skills, and this actually is a trick. This is a method that we use, and it does practice your division skills. On the bottom of your notes, you will see an XPuzzle cheat sheet. And if you notice, it gives you the side numbers, because remember, those are the ones that are missing. So these are the ones that are missing, these are missing, always going to be the side numbers missing. And it's going to be like, what are these? Well, that gives you a trick. Both positive, both positive. Positive, negative, both negative, and it's still adding because they're both the same sign. And then which one is bigger or smaller when one has to be negative and one has to be positive. This is your first step into factoring. If you have questions, please let me know. I will do 2 more examples, because this is the first step, and this is what's going to build the ground for the next couple days. The work up here, get rid of those numbers. It is part 2. The reason it says part 2 is because there was another one that would have been part 1, but we're not going to focus on that. So you're just going to find the 2 numbers. Use a piece of scratch paper because there is space limited. So I'm going to do numbers 3 and number 8. So I'm going to divide by 1. Gives me 32. I can check with my cheat sheet. Positive, negative. Scroll all the way back down. Positive, negative. They need to both be negative, and I'm adding. So I'll go back up here. So I'm adding. That gives me 33. Divided by 2 gives me 16. That gives me 18. Divided by 3 is a decimal. I don't even worry about decimals. We're not going to focus on those. Divided by 4 gives me 8. And then I add those, and I get 12. Well, I have found my number. All I need to do is place it in the sides and put the appropriate sign. If you remember, it had to both be negative, and that is my answer. Number 8 is the same problem, just has to both be positive, so I'm going to go ahead and switch that. Number 12, it is 10 and negative 11, so positive and then negative on bottom. So I need to make sure that they're both negative. Well, divided by 1 gives me 10. I add them together, I get 11. First try, don't have to do anything else. So I put 1 and 10. 1 times 10, that gives me 10. However, 1 plus 10 gives me positive 11. So I need to switch those and make them both negative. If you want to complete these ones, 2, 11, and there may be one more. Nope, there is not. 2 and 11 are special cases where the number is the same. So example, it needs to be positive and negative 5, positive and negative 4. It is up to you if you want to do those, or do other types of examples, but you don't have to. You can complete 20 of these. There's already 1 completed, and then there are 2 there for you, so you need to complete 17 more. The reason I'm giving a large amount on this is because this is crucial for future lessons. If you have questions, feel free to email me, leave a comment on either even this video or on the Google Classroom, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you. This is the start of our next unit, and I hope you all are staying healthy and safe. Here is our filled out notes. I'll just slowly scroll through them again. I know they're filled out, but they have some extra highlights. And then you can use those. Once again, if you have questions, let me